All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake Kearnan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler. And Martyn, the final regular season week is in the books. We are approaching playoffs now. What a year it's been, but what a weekend of football it's been.
Amazing weekend indeed, as so many of them have been actually this year. There's been some fascinating rounds of rugby in Super League, but also in the other competitions as well. Championship, League One, the NRL, very interesting results there as well, of course. So I think we've got a lot to talk about, Jake, and I suppose we better get on with it, haven't we?
Yeah, bloody oath, mate. Well, we'll jump right into Thursday night's matchups. Let's start with the one that didn't really have much meaning. Huddersfield defeated Castleford 34-10. A good way for Huddersfield, I guess, to finish their season after what's been a bit of a turbulent season, you might say.
A desperately disappointing season for Huddersfield, finishing ninth in the competition, 10 points outside the top six, which is, extraordinary, really, given that they were very optimistic at the start of the season with Ian Watson as the coach, that they were going to do well this year. Of course, Ian left halfway through the season, and, it's been taken over by Luke Robinson. And I was really glad to see them getting that win in their final game, because I think Luke was very keen to see them go into the close season with a win, and it was a convincing win, wasn't it? I mean, 24-point margin, Sam Hewitt getting 2 tries for them, and they can now go into the close season, and Luke can do some proper preparation for 2025. I think they still need to sign quite a number of players. They're losing quite a few. People like Chris Hill is heading off. Ollie Russell, who I really rate as a player, I've got to say, he won't be there next year, and several others are going. So, they've got some work to do.
And we sort of spoke about it before the podcast, but they've got plans apparently to build a new stadium. What do you make of those plans?
Well, I've got very mixed feelings about it. They're talking about building a new stadium that would have a capacity of 8,000 or 9,000. My preference would be for them to be far more determined to fill the existing stadium that they play in. I know they've said that the stadium that they've got is too big for them, but actually Huddersfield Giants need to learn how to promote themselves, in my book. They've got a co-tenant of that stadium, Huddersfield Town, who are in League One now in football, and play some pretty poor stuff, to be frank about it. And yet they still got 18,000 on Saturday to see them lose at home to Northampton 3-1 in what I'm told is a pretty turgid game. So for goodness sake, can't Huddersfield Giants do a bit better than drawing just 3,000 and odd people to watch their games? They need to learn how to promote themselves and stop people rattling around in that stadium. Get up to 5,000, 6,000, then 10,000 and more. We're all too ready to accept in our sport that it's played in front of small crowds, and I just think that's ridiculous. Wherever a rugby league team shares a stadium with any other sport, football usually, I prefer to see rugby league being the one that draws the larger attendances.
Yeah, it'd just be interesting to see if they, were at the top of the table, what differences we'd see in crowd attendances, because it is disappointing when you watch their matches and the stadium is quite bare.
It is. Oh, there's no doubt about it. Yeah, I mean, we'd obviously much prefer to see far more people there, but they've got to work on it. They've got, every club needs to. The trouble with our sport, Jake, is that we put issues connected with marketing clubs and promoting the game at the bottom of the priority list very often, instead of at the very top, which is where they should be. Without a crowd, you're nothing, are you?
That's right, yeah, nothing without your fans, and we'll see what happens with those plans going forward, but it'll be one to keep an eye on.
Yes.
We'll move on to the next matchup on Thursday night. We had Wigan defeating Salford 64-0, an absolute flogging, but it was probably expected.
Yeah, Salford had, I've forgotten now exactly how many number of debutants, and, they played with some spirit. They did their best, but obviously Wigan were well ahead of them. and scored, well, it was 11 tries in the end. Adam Kearnan kicked 10 out of 11.
It's pretty good with the boot, isn't he?
He's pretty good. And obviously Wigan were presented with the League Leaders Shield after the game, which was marvellous for them. And to give credit to them, they drew a crowd of 15,589 to witness what was always going to be a one-sided game. But Wigan fans love seeing Wigan scoring tries, so I suppose they were pretty well served on Thursday night. And an interesting little thing that I read was that when Salford selected their 21-man squad, they actually sold a lot of extra tickets for the game. Salford did, because it was all the families of all the players who were going to be making their debuts buying tickets to go and see their kids play, which was quite a nice element of that story, I thought.
No, that's one thing I do appreciate when teams do get to that final round of the season. They do hand out those debuts to players that have been training all year long, waiting for their chance.
Absolutely.
And, for Salford, where there wasn't too much riding on their positioning, it's great to see them hand out those debuts. And
it'll be interesting to see how many of those kids who played against Wigan on Thursday will ultimately come through to be first-team regulars. Keep those names in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to Friday night's matchups, mate, we had Leigh defeating St Helens 18 points to 12 in what was quite a tough battle.
That was the crucial game, wasn't it? And Ricky Latelli being sent off, and then St Helens scoring 2 tries while he was off the field. Leigh were winning 12-0. He didn't get sent off. He got yellow carded, and 12-0 became 12-all before he came back onto the field. But Leigh scored a brilliant try to win it, and it was Josh Charnley scoring his try that levelled him with Danny Maguire in the list of Super League all-time scorers. So let's just have a look. His 247th Super League try for Josh Charnley. Right. Only Ryan Hall is ahead of him. Yeah. And that's going to be an interesting battle for next year, because both players will still be playing. Ryan will be playing for Leeds and Josh staying at Leigh. So that's an interesting little issue on the side to keep a note of, I think, for next year.
Yeah, because, the rate that he's scoring tries at, and I'm not sure how old Charnley is. How old he is?
I think he's 32 or 32 or so now.
So but I assume you have a few more.
I wouldn't like to be quoted on that. I'd rather check it out. Yeah.
So, look, he could eventually take over Ryan Hall if we're assuming Hall's last season will be next year with Leeds, but we'll have to wait and see.
Ryan Hall still looks as fit as a fiddle to me, so it might not be his last season next year. You never know, do you?
No, that's right. Now, mate, with that one, obviously, Leigh secured that final playoff spot.
Fifth place.
Fifth, I guess. But what an achievement for them.
Well, I'm delighted for them, because I actually, if you look back at these podcasts, there was a point halfway through the season where they were 9 points outside the top 6. And everybody had written them off at that point. And I'm pretty sure that I'm on the record as saying, don't write Leigh off. I still think they could get into the top 6. Now, the thing is that this is the point at which I regret to say that I'm not a gambling man, because if I had been, at that point I would have put a lot of money on Leigh to win the grand final at what would have then been probably about 500 to 1, because I don't know what their price is now. They're probably obviously not the favourites, but you could very easily lay it off now and put some money on Wigan or whoever else you think might win it, to make sure that you did win some money.
Yeah.
So as I say, I'm not a gambler. But sometimes I almost wish I were. Because you can sort of, I could see it unfolding. I knew how determined they were to get there, and they had that terrible setback the week before, didn't they, against Hull KR? 24-0 they lost, but I still thought they would beat St Helens. To get to actually make it into the top 6.
How devastating would it have been if that yellow card did end up being the reason why they lost and missed out on playoffs? It
would have been, there's no doubt about it. And, it's... but it's great for Leigh, and, I'm sure that... we'll talk about the first week of the playoffs in a short while. But it's set it up quite nicely.
And the next matchup we had Hull KR defeating Leeds 26 points to 16, mate.
Well, Leeds were in that game for quite a while. They actually scored first, didn't they, through Reece Martyn, but couldn't quite keep it up, and Hull KR pulled back to 10-all at half-time and then pulled away in the second half. And Matt Parcell playing his last home game, playing his last regular season home game for them. He had an outstanding game and was our man of the match in that game. And Hull KR, finished second. I suppose they might have looked a bit angrily at Salford putting that weakened team out at Wigan, because if Salford had won at Wigan, which was always unlikely, even with their strongest team out, that Hull KR could still have won the League Leaders' Shield. But as it stands, they are going to finish. Well, they have finished second, so they get a week off, and then they play the highest ranked of the two teams that win through from the first round of the playoffs.
I remember sitting at the Warrington game early in the match and just checking the Leeds Hull KR score, and I saw Leeds were up, and it was sort of one of those moments where it's like, oh, Warrington could sneak into second place here with the big scoreline, and but it didn't happen in the end. But we'll move on to that match. Warrington defeating London 54 points.
Well, you were there. What did you think about it? I mean, obviously more one side. I thought it would be a one-sided game, but probably more so than I anticipated, really. Yeah,
it was a great display of attack from Warrington, and I guess defensively as well. Their line speed, they just had London pinned inside their own 20 for what seemed like most of the match, and they were constantly kicking from within their 10 or within their 20, and the ball was landing around the halfway mark. So they just were relentless, and
they were just a bit outclassed. In other words, London.
And like Mike Eccles after the match mentioned that he said the season realistically is probably 1 week too long for them. They've had all these close matchups and short turnarounds in the weeks prior, and unfortunately it just sort of boiled over, I guess you could say, in that last match.
Do you think Warrington's form in that game suggests that they could go all the way and win the competition this year?
I think so. Like, they're definitely a threat to those top two, but against a weakened London side, you want to see something like that against a playoff contending team before we can make that call.
Yes,
but look, it looked really crisp on the field. There wasn't many
Dufty
errors.
Back, and he played quite well.
Yeah, he was a live wire all match and got the early knock-off 60 minutes into the match, which was always the plan. But Sam Burgess said that he was fighting when they pulled him off in the 60th minute. I think he wanted to stay on and finish the match. But he looked really fit, and you couldn't tell that he'd missed a couple of weeks prior.
No. Well, more than 2 weeks, I think, wasn't it? But yes, and Matty Ashton scoring 3 tries for the second week in a row.
Yes. Yeah. It was unbelievable. I don't know. He's just so quick and evasive, and he just always seems to pop up there and at the right time.
He's brilliant at anticipating where, the situations that arise where he can score a try, isn't he? He's got real good intelligence on the field, I think.
And great timing too, because, when you are playing out wide, you've got to be able to set your depth perfectly and to know that, George Williams is going to rocket that long ball, and just to time it so it hits him perfectly on the chest at full speed. He's one of the best in the comp at it, I think.
Oh yes.
But try-scoring machine, and won't be surprised if we see many more from him in the coming weeks.
Oh, I'd have thought so, yeah.
But yeah, mate, it was an entertaining way to finish the season. Sam was quite proud of his men, and
absolutely.
I'm sure
they'll be a lot
pushing.
more proud if they, can get to Old Trafford.
Yeah, and he didn't seem too upset that they'd missed out on the week off next week.
No.
I think he's looking forward to versing St Helens. So,
I mean, the week off is a mixed blessing, really, because you want to keep playing in a sense, don't you? At such a crucial time of the season.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure after that loss to Leigh, maybe Warrington see them as a weakened side at the moment, but then they could have the opposite effect where they do want to bounce back against Warrington. So, looking forward to that matchup, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Moving on to Saturday's matchup, mate, we had Catalans defeating Hull FC 24 points to 4.
Well, this turned out to be a meaningless game, didn't it? Because by the time it was kicking off, Catalans could no longer get into the top 6. So, very disappointing for them, but at least they came up with a a win in their last match of the season, and Hull again, probably played a bit better than they've done against some teams without threatening to win the game. So, I mean, it's been a disastrous season for Hull. I mean, at least they got a crowd of over 9,000 there for that match, which is pretty impressive given the way they've played this year. But my goodness, they've got to do better next year. Hull, they can't have another season like this one. And there've got to be some changes made.
That's it. Well, they've gone all in on their roster for next season, and if there is disappointing results early, they'll be under major scrutiny.
Oh yes, gosh, yeah.
Just looking through any of the talking points of the round. Obviously, London. It's the last time we'll see them in Super League, which is a bit sad, mate.
It is.
We also have the news David Hughes is going to.
Well, let's talk about David Hughes. I mean, he's been involved at London. He bought the club from Richard Branson, actually, from the Virgin boss back in the late 1990s and or early 2000s. And I mean, he's put so much money into that club. There are various estimates of how much he's spent on London Broncos in their various venues where they've played and so on, and it's probably about 25 million quid, very broadly. Nobody can say for sure. So it's and for much of that time they've been in Super League, as he's pointed out, but they've never managed to establish the firm foundations that I'm sure he would have liked to establish. But the ironic thing is, for London Broncos, that I think the best season they've had has probably been this season, despite the fact that they've finished at the bottom of the Super League, because they've been playing at Wimbledon's Cherry Red Records Stadium, which is an ideal size for them, an ideal venue. Very often they've managed to get crowds of 3,000 or 4,000 there, and in a stadium that holds about 9,000 or 10,000, that doesn't look too bad. And everybody who's been there seems to have enjoyed themselves watching London Broncos. My own daughter and her husband were there when Hull played there some weeks ago, and they said to me what a nice experience it was. So I hope that somebody steps forward to step into David Hughes' shoes. Now, I understand, to give enormous credit to David, I think he is going to leave that club debt-free. So if you do want to buy it, and anybody watching this podcast who's interested in buying a rugby league club in London, you can buy it debt-free, as I understand it, although obviously there's going to be an enormous, liability initially of getting the club re-established in the Championship and so on, and investing in a squad. So it's going to cost quite a lot of money. But I understand that their coach, Mike Eccles, is going to stay with the club, assuming it's obviously still going, which we all hope it will be. And, from what I understand, and again, I'm not certain about this, I could be wrong, but I think they might stay at the Wimbledon Stadium for next year. I hope they do. So it's not necessarily all doom and gloom. And I understand from talking to one or two people this morning that there are a couple of people who have expressed a strong interest in buying the club from David Hughes. I don't know who they are, sadly, but one or two people who've been involved in or are involved in rugby league elsewhere. So, as I say, it isn't all bad news for London, but they do need to, whoever buys it needs to get in and build up the club from the ground floor again, don't they? And build on what David's done until now. I mean, David, people tell me he's either 80 years old or very nearly 80 years old, so you can't blame him for wanting to step away. I know he's been desperately disappointed by the adoption of the IMG grading system that condemned the Broncos to being demoted this year, regardless of where they finished in the Super League table. And I think he's not the only person who's disappointed by that. So, we'll have to just see where it goes. But, I really do think it's very important for a club in London to continue and for it to be reasonably successful.
Because like we've touched on it many times this season, but you can only imagine if they did have that potential to stay in Super League next season, the squad that they would have been able to put together, the players they would have been able to attract, had the players known that there was going to be a future with London, we would have seen a much different squad.
Oh, of course we would.
Year.
But to give them credit, particularly in the second half of the season, that London squad has done extremely well, and obviously quite a few of them will appear in Super League next year, but for other clubs.
That's right. And that was one of the things Eccles was quite proud of in his post-match press, was the players and the talent that they've unearthed this season that may not have gotten that shot had it not been for London's place in Super League this year. So,
absolutely, yeah.
But yes, we'll move on, mate. So the Albert Goldthorpe medal has officially been awarded to someone.
Mark Sneed, yes, he's the winner, and by 1 point from Mikey Lewis.
Yes.
So, that's really congratulations to him. And Mark Sneed, of course, was also selected in the Super League Dream Team this last week, and also, as I mentioned in my column in League Express this week, we had a readers' poll last week to say which player who wasn't included in Sean Wayne's England 31-man England squad for this autumn series against Samoa, which player is the unluckiest not to be selected. And we gave a choice of 7 players, and Mark Sneed came top of the list. 39.86% of readers thought that he was the most unlucky player not to be in that England squad. Interestingly enough, the second player was Dean Hadley of Hull KR, who's had an outstanding season as well, in my view, and is an incredibly underrated player.
Absolutely.
I think Hadley has been, particularly in the second half of the year, I think he's been outstanding. And I think he was very unlucky, like Sneedy, not to be in the England squad.
Yeah. No, it's some telling figures, those ones. Obviously, 39%, that's a big portion of the vote as well.
Very nearly 40%.
Sneed,
yeah.
So, it'll be interesting to see if he can snag that Man of Steel award as well, mate, to top it all
well,
off.
that's the next one that's coming up. And, I think... but it would be a bit odd, wouldn't it, if the Man of Steel were not in the England squad. So I have a funny feeling he might not quite make that.
Yeah.
Might not make that one. I don't want to say anything more, but it would be an oddity.
It's a conspiracy.
Well, I wouldn't say that.
Yeah.
But I think I suspect that the Man of Steel might go to Mike Lewis.
Okay. That'll be interesting to see. Yes. All right, mate. We'll move on to some of your other talking points in your column this week. It's set to be an exciting weekend in the Championship this weekend, mate.
Well,
can you tell us about that one?
If you look at the top 6 in the Championship, you've got Wakefield, Toulouse, Bradford, York, Featherstone and Sheffield. And Widnes Vikings are just outside the top 6, a point behind. But the really big thing this weekend is a very big game between York and Featherstone, both of them on 28 points, 4th and 5th. Now, whoever loses that game may well miss out on the top 6, because Sheffield Eagles play Dewsbury this weekend, and you'd think they would certainly win that game. And Widnes visit Barrow, and they will be the strong favourites to win that game too. So my suspicion is that York and Featherstone, the loser, will be out of the 6, and that will be very sad for either of those two clubs, actually. And we can see that Wakefield and Toulouse are certain to finish in the top 2. Bradford's certain to finish 3rd, but York, Featherstone and Sheffield all equal on 28. So, it's going to be quite an interesting one, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's been a really good competition this year. Apart from the fact that one or two clubs have been struggling financially, Halifax and Whitehaven, of course.
Yep. And while we're on it, we may as well touch on the League One results from the weekend. Keighley defeated Rochdale 26 points to 22. And
in a thrilling game, actually, that was shown on the Sportsman website.
Yeah. And Hunslet defeating Midlands 18 to 14, which is also... quite a tight game.
Two very tight games, both settled by 4-point margins, which shows that League One is alive and kicking, doesn't it? And they're going to have a new team next year, of course, in League One. So which will be Gould Vikings,
Well,
which is a small town situated roughly halfway between Leeds and Hull. So they seem very optimistic that they're going to perform well in League One next year, and I certainly hope they do.
Wouldn't it be amazing if they went all the way to getting promoted to the Championship?
I don't think it'll go that well, but you never know. It could do. I mean, it depends. I mean, they're going to have Scott Taylor coaching them, the ex-Hull player, who's a very smart guy, actually. Very, very shrewd fellow. And they've got James Clark, the ex-chief executive of Hull FC, advising them. Right. So that's going to be quite interesting. And they just, were chosen ahead of Bedford Tigers for that vacant League One spot. But there is some talk now of... There's a lot of doubt being expressed about Cornwall, whether Cornwall will continue in League One next year, and there are quite a lot of suggestions that Cornwall, their license, their membership license of the RFL, will be sold to Bedford Tigers. I don't know how true that is, but it's been widely spoken about. So Bedford could end up there after all, and I think. Where Bedford is situated, north of London in Bedfordshire, would be quite a good location for rugby league, and they're a thriving go-ahead community club at the moment. So, and I think they would, if they did have a team, they'd share Bedford Rugby Union Club's Goldington Road ground.
Okay.
So I think the it is set up for Bedford there if they want to. Enter the competition, but I'd be very sorry to lose Cornwall. Cornwall was set up by Eric Perez when he was going to set up a club in Ottawa, and that they actually moved it to Cornwall. But he bought the license from Hemel Stags to set up a team in Canada, but then COVID intervened, and Toronto Wolfpack, ended their life, and we ended up with Ottawa moving to Cornwall, which was very odd in a way, but nonetheless, they've developed a bit of a following down there, and it would be I'd be sad to see them go.
Yeah, it will be one to keep an eye on, that's for sure. So we'll see what happens there, mate. Now we obviously touched on it a bit earlier, but the Dream Team's been announced. I will put the full team list up on the screen for those watching on YouTube, but I'll quickly run through it. So we had Matt Dufty at fullback, Matty Ashton on one wing and Liam Marshall on the other, Nene McDonald and Jake Wardle in the centres, Mikey Lewis and Mark Sneed in the halves, Matty Lees, Danny Walker and Luke Thompson in the front row. The back row we had Reece Martin, Junior Nsemba and Elliot Mella. So a really good team. Obviously you wouldn't like to take on that team on the pitch, but
you wouldn't know.
Any surprises in here, mate? Any that you're quite happy to see in the side?
Well, I'm very glad to see Mark Sneed there as the winner of our Albert Goldthorpe medal, but I'm the one player who is conspicuous by his absence is Bevan French. I think Bevan French is probably the best player in Super League in the sense of being the most exciting to watch. And incidentally, Bevan French, if you were creating a league table of individual players and their success in Super League, in terms of the percentage of matches they played in that their team actually won, then Bevan would be right at the top. His winning record this year is 91%, and that's a higher percentage than any other player who's played a significant number of matches. Some of the games he didn't feature in for Wigan were games that they actually lost. Wigan only lost 5 games throughout the season, but I think a couple of those, or maybe 3 of them, were when Bevan didn't play. So Bevan, of all the players in Super League, has the best winning record. And actually, in a curious way, it'd be interesting to create a list, wouldn't it, of individual players to show their success rate when they win games. And that thought occurred to me when I was a few weeks ago speaking to Ryan Hall. And Ryan, if you remember, had a couple of years in the NRL and didn't play many games. But in his final year in the NRL, he actually played only 5 games for the Sydney Roosters. But the team won all of those 5 games when he played. So he's one of the few players who have played in the NRL and in one season had a 100% record, which is quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I looked that one up, and so as I say, I think it's quite interesting to see which players, when they're selected, tend to end up with wins on the board, and vice versa, which players have a poorer record.
Maybe we need like a separate MVP trophy, so the most valuable player to their team.
Absolutely.
And then we could award
Wouldn't
that
that
based
be
on win
interesting?
percentage. Yeah.
Wouldn't that be interesting?
There'd have to be some sort of criteria on minimum games played, you'd have to assume. But
well, I'll tell you what, one of the things that we always talk about in rugby league is that because it's a team game, we don't give enough recognition to individuals. Some of the sports are much better at elevating individuals to star status. And if we had a league table where we had players as well as clubs in a league table, it'd be interesting, wouldn't it, to see which players were leading and which players were not. And someone like Bevan. I wonder whether if we'd had that league table in say in League Express or online or wherever you might have it, if people had been thought carefully about that 91% success record, whether they might have reconsidered the dream team or not.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I think he's definitely a victim of his injuries this year, because I think he'd be back-to-back Man of Steel award winner this year as well.
He may still win the Man of Steel, but you don't know, because with the way they do it now, if you miss a number of weeks, then you miss accumulating any points, and that's the same thing with the Albert Goldthorpe medal. So by being injured, it was interesting that Matt Dufty was really challenging for the Albert Goldthorpe medal until he got injured, and then of course he didn't pick up any points until he got 3 points at the weekend for the win over London Broncos. So but interestingly enough, I was just sort of looking at the dream team. I think very often you find that the dream team is dominated by overseas players, but this year we've only got Matt Dufty, Nenny McDonald, and Reece Martyn as overseas players in the 13. So 10 out of 13 of them are English players, which is pretty good, isn't it? A good record, really. And actually, that contrasts with the Albert Goldthorpe table, because in we've published the 11 leading players in the Albert Goldthorpe table, and overseas players who are in it include Matt Dufty, Tom Amone, Lachlan Lamb, Nenny McDonald, Bevan French, and Reece Martyn. So 6 of them are Southern Hemisphere players in that top 11.
No, very interesting to see. But it's great to see all those English players, and I guess it goes to show that the talent that's coming through the ranks and the development in this country
absolutely.
is
and then you think about
direction.
the English players in the NRL. I think we'll give Samoa a lot to think about when they come over. Next month.
No, I agree. Did you read the story recently that the reason, the dates that were given for those fixtures were partly because of a wedding that's happening in Australia? So I think Stephen Crichton's wedding, so they had to shift the dates back a bit.
Yeah,
because otherwise, most of the Samoan team wouldn't be able to come over because of Stephen's wedding. So
that's you've got to smile, haven't you, really?
Yeah. In defence of Stephen, I'm sure he probably had this wedding planned well in advance of the fixture dates being announced. So.
But, you'd have thought that might have been rearranged rather than the Test series. But, But anyway, he should be a happy man when he comes over, shouldn't he?
Yes. Hopefully,
newly married.
for them, they don't party too hard, obviously.
Well, let's hope they do.
I guess maybe for an England standpoint. But it'd be great to see that series. Now, moving on, mate, you also had an opinion article in this month's edition of the Rugby League World magazine, mate, just talking about...
The October edition, which has just come out.
Nice front cover on that one too, mate.
Yes,
I like that, the red and the blue. But you were talking about the league's branding and how we can learn from other codes around the world.
Well, the thing is, we've got IMG now who have been involved with us for nearly 2.5 years. And one of the things that they... said they were going to do was to improve the branding of Rugby League, and in particular Super League. What they seem to have done is they've improved the digital branding of the individual clubs. They've given a lot of advice about how to have a greater impact digitally, which is great, very, very welcome and so on. But the trouble with our sport is that when you watch it on TV or when you're at a game live, you see virtually no evidence of branding. I mean, branding is so important in the modern world, isn't it? It's all products are, consider very carefully the way that their branding is presented to the world. Because by having good branding, it means you can, to put it in a nutshell, you can charge higher prices and you become more profitable. And that's true in the wider economic world, but it's true in sport specifically as well. So our branding is virtually non-existent, I'm afraid. You look at a rugby league pitch when a game's on TV, there's absolutely no branding there whatsoever. It doesn't tell you that you're watching Super League. It doesn't tell you that anything about the teams that you're watching. Very often you've got to guess who the teams are because it's not absolutely obvious from the colours that they're wearing. It's pretty sad, really, I think. And, we wonder why our sport doesn't attract more people. And one of the things is it's so difficult to identify with for people who are not already involved in it. Even just the grid line marks, 10 metres, 20 metres, 30 metres, which are shown on NRL games, on, live or on TV, you don't see them in Super League games. And that's, everything looks so bare. And you can't expect to attract people. People nowadays, more than ever before, are so conscious of things like logos and packaging, the way things are presented. And, you see this with in so many aspects of life. And, of course, the sport that I contrast rugby league with is the NFL in America, where branding is absolutely everything. You watch an NFL game on TV and, you see exactly what it is. You can immediately see, you understand what it is that you're watching, the way the pitch is marked out, the way the teams' names are, at the end of the pitch and so on, the way the stadium is bedecked, with NFL and club logos and so on. Everything is planned to the last detail. And of course, you see a massively sold out stadium as well. I mean, I don't think the NFL is anything like as entertaining as rugby league, and I don't think any sport is. But every other sport beats us to the punch, don't they? In terms of the way they present themselves, and it's a crisis. I mean, NFL uniforms are so distinctive, whereas rugby league, Super League uniforms, you've got a variety of different shirt designs and so on. They do carry the Super League logo on the shoulder, but they've got so many other things on the shirt that it tends to, just look cluttered, really. And it's a shame because, our sport could be so much bigger than it is.
And like you look at, say, the NRL fields, they have sponsors all over the field, whether they're actually painted on the pitch or if they're just digitally
images generated.
Generated. And I just feel like that's a missed opportunity for, I guess, more funding from sponsors for the league as a whole.
Of course.
And you always see like the NRL logo in the middle of the field. You never see that here.
Well,
in the
another
Super League.
sport that's really well that does really well in terms of branding is AFL, isn't it? In Australia, very distinctive shirts. Everything when you switch on an AFL game, it's an AFL game, don't you?
That's right.
Everything tells you that's the message.
Yeah, it's there's a lot to learn, especially like you said from the NFL. I've been watching as the season's just kicked off as a Saints fan, and it's not often that you'll see a home game for a team. You very rarely see visiting fans in the stadium because they just can't get tickets, and the crowd does a great job of having all of the same coloured jerseys on. And as you said, you watch a Kansas City Chiefs game, and the whole crowd is just red, and you know that you're watching a Chiefs game.
Well, I've mentioned before that college football is so fascinating in America as well, and they get enormous crowds. They sell out their stadiums and so on. And I've mentioned before, I sometimes like to take note of Virginia Tech, and they tend to, they sort of have, a maroon and white uniform. And sometimes they tell the fans, if you're sitting in blocks A, C, or E, wear maroon. And if you're sitting in blocks B, D, and F, wear white.
Yeah.
So the maroon and white is shown, on the TV when people are sitting there, and they do it. It's just fantastic. Their interaction with their fans is terrific. I think
and it looks great on screen as well. And they're the Virginia Tech. They're the ones that have Enter Sandman playing in the background as they walk out.
And they all jump up and down as they're coming out. Yes, it's amazing.
Another college, Texas A&M. I think this year they've just brought back. I think it's a Kanye West song. It's called Power, and the start of that song is electric, and they've just brought it back in this season. I don't think they've played it for a few years now, but it was a bit of a surprise to the crowd when they started that song when the team ran out, and the whole crowd just went ballistic.
Well, they make a very big thing of coming onto the field in college football, and if you notice. You often find, in a college football team, there are probably about 40-odd players altogether, but they all run to the side and sort of embrace the people sitting at the front of the crowd. Yeah. And it's great. They don't just do that at the end; they do it at the beginning, and that's an interesting one, isn't it? They don't just sort of walk out and walk into the middle of the pitch and wait for the game to start. They actually go and interact with the crowd. Yeah, which is very interesting.
Do you think that's partly down to cultural differences?
I'm sure it is.
In our countries, both Australia and here in England, I feel like the crowd would probably, react negatively to that. You might call them a show pony, or
it might do. You never know. But if everybody did do it, we'd get used to it, wouldn't we?
Oh yeah. I'm all for it, mate. Bring it into our game.
Yeah.
Now, mate, there's a laws committee taking place tomorrow. I believe they're going to review some of the rules and the laws around the game. One suggestion that they're going to discuss is the captain's challenge.
Well, I think that's likely to come in next year. From speaking to Robert Hicks, but it's not certain because it's got to be discussed and approved. But I get the feeling that most people want to see it happen. I think Robert's very keen to see. They think that it would add to the entertainment value of the game. It may or may not. I'm not sure whether that's true or not. But it would certainly allow, the officials to get the decisions right, because we have seen in the NRL that very often the captain's challenge is accepted and a decision is changed. And there were a couple of decisions actually early on in that Leigh v St Helens game last week, a couple that went against Leigh, that I thought, were very dubious decisions. I'm not saying they were wrong, but they were debatable and might conceivably have been reversed if Leigh had a right of a captain's challenge. As it turned out, Leigh won the game anyway, so it didn't affect things too much. But I think I'd support the idea of a captain's challenge coming into our competition.
Yeah, no, I agree. Just as long
do
as
you like it as an Aussie?
Yeah, I do like it. It's always interesting seeing when they do go for it and when they don't go for it, because there's a lot of scrutiny around front rowers saying that, oh no, I didn't knock it on, and then a captain's reviewed it and he's clearly knocked it on. So
yes.
I'm sure it'll be strictly down to the captain and the halves. But yes, I'm all for it, mate. Anything to make the game, I guess, more accurate, especially because referees make mistakes, and unfortunately they don't have eyes everywhere. They can't see everything that happens within the ruck. So I think it'll be a great benefit. One of the other things that they've mentioned is potentially reviewing the double movement, mate, which we've talked about before.
Well, I mean, I think they're going to both review the rule and review the sanction. And what they mean by that is they might well say that if a player can reach out and put the ball over the line, even though his elbow might have hit the floor, at the moment, that is a penalty to the defending side, and they clear their lines, obviously. Mm-hmm. They think that sanction is probably too heavy for what it's a fairly natural. If you're a player, it's a natural reaction to want to put the ball down, over the line. What they might do, if the double movement rule is going to be retained, it might just be a case of saying play the ball, from where you were actually tackled, rather than giving a penalty away. But there's also going to be a discussion about whether actually the try should be allowed to stand. And I think it should, because I think if you can get the ball down before the referee calls held, I think that should be a try, personally. And, we'd see a lot of tries, therefore, awarded that are not awarded at the moment.
That's it. You see so many of those too, where you're like, well, the defender should have done a better job of wrapping that ball up. If you can get to the line, if there's a defender draped around, your torso, but you can still get an arm to the line.
Yeah.
I agree.
It will be debated tomorrow, and, I was saying to Robert Hicks, actually, that it would be great to have that debate televised, because I think we'd all like to see, that there might be some drawbacks to awarding a try for a double movement that I've not thought of. So I'd be very interested to see whether people on that committee have objections that are valid objections, which there might be. I don't know. But interestingly enough, I don't think they have the double movement rule in rugby union, do they?
No,
I think you can, if you can touch it down, it's a try, and it's much more straightforward than the rule that we try and adopt.
Yep, and I agree. It would be great, even just a YouTube live stream that we could all tune into. It'd be awesome. Yes. A few other things. They're going to discuss the tackle height, obviously.
Yeah.
Potentially milking as well. They're going to look at players laying down for penalties.
Yes, what to do about that. Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see when we check back in next week, mate, if we have any further news on those.
I'm sure we will do. Yeah.
We can discuss them then. Now, what else do we have here, mate? So much news. We've had 2 new vice presidents elected to the RFL. We've got former Leeds and England international Danica Prim and Swinton Lions chief executive Stephen Wild.
Yes, great for them. And Steve's done a great job with Swinton over the years. And Danica she was a very good player, and she's become a TV pundit. So, and actually she used to do very well on Channel 4's coverage last year, and Premier Sports coverage of the Championship when it used to cover the Championship. I think she's a very eloquent woman, and good to see her being honoured in this way.
Yeah, and just speaking on the women's game itself, we've had some Women of Steel nominees put forward for this year. We've got Faye Gaskin, Georgie Hetherington, and Lucy Murray. They're the 3 nominees for the award.
Yes, from the 3 top clubs.
Yes,
St Helens, York and Leeds, respectively.
So congratulations to all those women. All the best, and we'll see.
We'll have to see who the men's Man of Steel nominees are soon, won't we?
Yes.
Actually, I think that'll be out fairly shortly.
Oh, no, absolutely.
Yeah, but good luck to them. They're all very worthy players.
No, definitely. Now, just want to touch on Elliot Mella, mate. What's the latest on his situation?
He's going to be at the tribunal tonight. This is Tuesday, of course, as we speak, at 5:30 p.m. So he's appealing against the severity of a 2-match suspension, obviously hoping to put it down to 1 game so that he can play in their first semi-final, whoever that's against. And we don't know who it's against at the moment. But so they believe that they can show that the 2-match suspension was excessive. And I hope they succeed, because, I'd love to see Elliot, being able to play for them in that game. I actually had a thought about this, because Hull KR are dual registered with Featherstone Rovers, and I thought to myself, well, surely they could say that because Featherstone have a game this weekend, that would count as his second game. But unfortunately, at this stage of the season, you can only play for a dual registered team in a lower competition if you've already played 4 matches for them. So that's out of the question, I'm afraid. It would have been a great get-out clause if it hadn't been. Yeah. And of course, they don't have a reserve game, because the reserve competition has ended already this season. So, it's it all depends on them persuading the tribunal tonight that they ought to have mercy on him.
And potentially maybe one of the only instances where the week off is a blessing and a curse for a club.
Oh, yes. Absolutely, yeah.
It doesn't count. But, all right, mate, let's look at some of the matches happening this week. Obviously, in the NRL last week, we had the Sharks defeating the Cowboys 26 points to 18, and the Roosters defeating Manly 40 points to 16. A big win for the Roosters.
Yes, yes.
Did you get to watch any of those matches, mate?
Only the highlights. I didn't see the all the games themselves. But yes, Cronulla have done well. They've always had a bad record in the playoffs, but they're now through to the last 4, and they're obviously the smallest club that remains. There's one potential problem for the NRL. Over the years, the NRL always had was always able to say with confidence that any of the 16 or 17 teams as they are now could be in with a chance of winning the competition. But we're getting to the stage now where it's getting to be the same clubs every year, isn't it? Penrith, Melbourne and the Roosters. I mean, Cronulla are the new team in the last 4 this year, but I don't think they'll win against Penrith. So it looks like being a grand final between Penrith and probably Melbourne or the Roosters. And they've got to be a bit careful. They need to get more teams. I mean, last year Brisbane got to the grand final, of course, but this year they're down in 12th. So, and last year New Zealand Warriors finished 4th, but this year they're down in 13th. So, it's a potential problem if somebody can't break the spell of Penrith and Melbourne, I think. But having said that, they're both great teams, and they both serve up a very worthy grand final. Yeah. I've got no doubt about it.
Who do you think you would take if that is the grand final?
Well, I think I'd go for Melbourne this year. I just think they're outstanding. And the great thing about Melbourne, it's interesting, in Australian sport this weekend, they play at home against the Roosters on Friday. Now, the AFL Grand Final will take place in Melbourne on Saturday. But for amazingly enough, there isn't a Melbourne side in the AFL Grand Final, which is very unusual, of course. And so Melbourne Storm have Melbourne to themselves this weekend. So hopefully they'll draw a capacity crowd for their game against the Roosters. And the AFL Grand Final is between Sydney Swans and Brisbane Lions. New South Wales versus Queensland, which will stick in the craw of a lot of Victorian-based AFL fans, I would think.
Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to watching that grand final because, coming from that Brisbane area, we do keep an eye on how the Lions are going. They got to the grand final last year, but narrowly lost that matchup. So I think they got in from 5th place on the ladder as well this year. So it's a really good effort from them.
Very impressive. Yeah, they beat the Greater Western Sydney Giants, I think they're called, didn't they? And or was it? Did they beat them this year?
It might have been Geelong.
Was it Geelong they beat? Right. Yeah. Okay.
With a G, I think.
Yes. Yes, of course.
But mate, it sort of sparked a bit of a debate in the code wars again. I think Volandis, you were saying, had a bit of a response to some of the AFL's
Well,
claims.
there's a guy called Mark Robinson who presents a AFL TV show called, I think it's 360 AFL or something. And he said, because of course the Sydney Swans sold out their game at the weekend in Sydney at the SCG, 41,000, I think. And the Cronulla Sharks only managed to attract 19,000 and odd for their playoff game against North Queensland at Allianz Stadium. And it prompted this guy to say, well, it's very obvious now that AFL is going to take over New South Wales from Rugby League, which is remarkably wishful thinking. And Peter Vlandis did an interview on Channel 9 on Monday night and pointed out that the average viewing figures for AFL in New South Wales is something like about 23,000. And the average viewing figures for the NRL in New South Wales is about 1 million. So, they've got a long way to go. I mean, they present themselves very well. And the Sydney Swans, they benefited enormously back 20-odd years ago from the Super League war when Rugby League split into two competitions. And then when North Sydney were excluded from the competition when the two sides came back together in 1998, I think it was, and a lot of North Sydney fans, of which there were quite a lot north of the bridge, defected to watch AFL, and they've benefited from that ever since. And it just shows how stupid it is to close down a rugby league club somewhere, because you lose those fans and you never get the chance to win them back. Yeah,
that's disappointing. And
yeah.
I mean, we will see the Bears back in the competition in some form, but they're saying it's going to be a Perth team.
Yes,
so,
it seems an odd thing to me to link a new Perth club to the old North Sydney one, but we'll see how that develops.
Yes. So that leaves this week. Storm will take on the Roosters. Penrith will take on the Sharks. Just get your quick picks on those two.
Two home wins, I think, pretty certain. And actually, the slightly disappointing thing about the NRL playoffs so far is that there haven't been any shocks, and most of the games have been fairly convincing wins for the higher based teams. So as I say, there's been a discrepancy there in ability, I suppose, and some of the teams that are currently in the lower half of the table need to bounce back. I mean, what's quite interesting, actually, about the NRL this year is that a lot of the best supported clubs haven't actually finished in the top 8. Brisbane, New Zealand Warriors, Parramatta, South Sydney, all those clubs that would bring enormous crowds to any playoff games have been absent this year, although that was made up for by Canterbury, who, drew 50,000 in their playoff game that they actually lost to Manly. So, it swings and roundabouts, but we need a team like Canterbury or Parramatta or whoever to bounce back, Brisbane, of course, to bounce back and win the competition in the near future.
Yeah, change it up a bit, definitely. All right, mate, we'll look at this weekend's matchups in the Super League. On Friday night, we have Salford taking on Leigh, 8 p.m. kickoff. Who do you think will get through in this one?
Well, it's a toss-up, isn't it? But I suspect that Leigh might just have a bit too much for Salford, especially with Edwin Apapi came back into the Leigh side against St Helens on Friday night and had an absolutely outstanding game. I think he's an absolutely brilliant player, I think he's a potential man of steel, actually, if I'm honest about it. A really fine player. And I think he could be, instrumental in Leigh winning that game. So I think I would tip Leigh to win it. Not by a big margin, but I think they might just be a bit too strong in the middle of the field. And if they are, I think Edwin Apapi will make hay while the sun shines.
No, absolutely. It was great to see him back in that lineup. But we'll move on to Saturday's matchup. Warrington taking on St Helens at 5:30.
What a great game in prospect. I mean, Warrington are playing well at the moment, but St Helens have got most of their big-name players back again. I know they lost at Leigh on Friday night, but I think they could be a real. I mean, we all know how St Helens really come to the fore when it's at the crucial time of the season. And I just have a strange feeling that they might win this game and shock Warrington on home turf. And if they do, that would be, most people would think Warrington would win that game based on current form. Yeah. But I suspect that Saints might really pull all the stops out and give them a shock.
Yeah, no, I expect that one will be a very tightly contested battle.
It's going to be a great game. Yeah. And, 50-50 or, in my view, 51-49, let's say.
Yeah, perfect. Well, that's the Super League previews, mate. I will just touch on York defeating Leeds in the Women's Super League semi-final over the weekend, 12 points to 10.
They did, and St Helens beat Wigan as well in a game that was kicked off at 7:30 on Sunday night, so it was too late to include in League Express this week, but their grand final will be York versus St Helens.
Then that'll be next Sunday, is it? I think it's October 6th. I think that's the date.
I think it is October 6th. Yeah.
So I'll have to check my calendar, but that'll be a very tough battle.
Yes, and great. We give some great coverage to the women's game. We had a full page this week for the Leeds York game, and well deserved as well.
No, absolutely, mate. All right, mate. Well, before we wrap things up here today, anything else that we've forgotten about or need to touch on?
Well, I don't think so. I think we've covered most things, haven't we? Now we'll probably think of something as soon as we put the microphones down. But I think
the phone's ringing out the back now. Yeah, It's probably someone with some important news.
Absolutely, yes, yes.
But all right, mate. Well, we will remind our viewers and listeners if you do want to get your subscription to League Express or grab yourself a copy of the Rugby League World magazine, head along to www.totalrl.com/shop. If you're watching on YouTube, you can just scan the QR code that will be across the screen now, and that'll take you straight to Pocket Mags, the website where you can get it. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you are on YouTube.
And next week, I think we're going to have Gary Schofield joining us.
Oh, Gary.
So Gary giving his opinions on the opening weekend of the playoffs, and that's always something to look forward to, I think. Yes. He's very incisive.
Oh, absolutely, mate. Straight to the point with Gary. Doesn't hold back, so I'm sure the listeners will be looking forward to that one. All right, mate. Well, we'll wrap it up here and do it again next week, hey?
Great stuff. Great to see you again, Jake, and we'll crack on.
Sounds good.
Cheers.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks,
Cheers.
mate.